Hello, and welcome back to Around the Counter with Molly and Friends. I'm Molly Jones, and this is a podcast for people who care about Utah politics. With me today is Turner C. Bitton. Turner is the founding executive director of Wasatch Advocates for Livable Communities, WALK. He's an Ogden cattle farm kid turned Glendale resident who sits on the Salt Lake City Transportation Advisory Board, Housing Authority of Salt Lake City, and is chair of the Salt Lake City Police Civilian Review Board. Turner, welcome Around the Counter.
Thank you for having me, Molly. I'm glad to be here.
Glad to have you here. So I understand you're a big pickleball guy.
I am, but if we start talking about pickleball, I'm going to get distracted for the next several hours. I can talk about it ad nauseum.
Well, give me the quick overview, like why I should do pickleball. I've never played before, and people seem to really like it, and I don't get it.
Well, if you're like me and you don't like to run a lot, pickleball is a perfect mix between ping pong and tennis. So the thing that I love about pickleball is that people of all different ages and abilities can play it. And so I have had multiple experiences of getting roasted by Helen and Ethel down at the local pickleball courts. One of my favorite stories from when I first got into pickleball, we went and played at the new courts in Murray. They were new at the time. They're not new now, but we literally lost to a woman who was in a sling, probably in her mid 70s, who had just broken her arm mountain biking. And she absolutely roasted us. And so people of all ages and abilities can play pickleball. And it's one of the things that I love.
Man, okay. Well, I'm a big road cyclist, and I feel that way because it's there's not a lot of running involved in road
Uh-huh.
cycling. There's just going into the mountains and suffering, which I
Yep.
really enjoy. So pickleball seems like a nice light sort of way to get your exercise in.
Yep. If you want to suffer in the city and not have to ride anywhere, pickleball's the sport for you.
All right, folks, write in and tell us, have you taken up pickleball now that Turner has recommended it? So, as I said in the intro, you sit on the Transportation Advisory Board, the Housing Authority, and you chair the Police Civilian Review Board. For someone sitting at their kitchen counter trying to figure out how the heck local government works, how do these three entities connect to shape a neighborhood's daily life?
Well, I think at the end of the day, they're all about civic engagement and the city getting the correct input from the public about important things like policing or transportation. The Housing Authority Board is a little bit of a different animal in that we are directly contributing housing stock to the city in the form of senior housing, housing for lower income people, and really acting as a catalyst for the kinds of housing that solve social problems that are not necessarily easy to solve. I think as we get into our conversation about housing today, we'll probably talk a lot about the difficulty of creating affordable housing. But when you're trying to provide housing for folks at the lower end of the income spectrum in a city that's growing, where there's a lot of development happening and growth happening, you need public entities that are able to directly finance and provide housing. Otherwise, the market can't solve some problems, and those problems include senior housing, and they include housing for low income people, among a variety of other types of housing. The Transportation Advisory Board, I think each of us, when we get up in the morning, even if we don't think about, how am I going to get from place A to B, as we're in our commute going from place A to B, we may be complaining about the quality of the roads or thinking about different alternatives. Like you, I love to ride my bike everywhere. I would say about 90% of my trips are on a bike, unless I'm leaving Salt Lake City and going somewhere else. Even then, I do love to ride my bike, between cities. But oftentimes, if I'm going, to Utah County, it's not always easy to get down there and convenient to get down there on a bike, even taking public transit, which is a great connector. So the Transportation Advisory Board is meant to really bring community voices in and help Salt Lake City plan for the future of transportation. And then the Civilian Review Board, this is something I've been involved in since 2019. We're undergoing some structural changes right now, and then I will be leaving the board. But uh, the Civilian Review Board to me is most important because it's about reinforcing what I think is one of the most important things about our society, which is that whether it's the military or local law enforcement, there's a deep ethos of civilian control and oversight over the use of force. And so while the Civilian Review Board, we're not dishing out um, uh, we're making recommendations to the police chief. We're not actually disciplining officers. We're just making recommendations as an advisory body. It's still important work when we're looking at officer involved uses of force or violence, and we're able to represent the public's view in those discussions, looking at city policy, looking at what the expectation of the community is and how it interacts with law enforcement, and making recommendations both on policy and individual uses of force to our police chief, who then, dispenses that disciplinary action if it's needed.
Interesting. So, did we get some breaking news here that you're leaving the Police Accountability Review Board?
It's not breaking news.
Oh.
I've been on the board now for 7 years. My term expired a number of months ago. Basically, all we're waiting is for the updated policy that governs the board to be adopted, and then we'll be able to get to a place where I can step away. If I leave, we basically won't have a quorum, and so we won't be able to act. But once that policy change is made, I will be riding off into the sunset, and other capable folks will take over.
Speaking of riding off into the sunset, you talked about going down to Provo on public transit. And I understand that Trax, FrontRunner in particular, just received maybe $1 billion from the federal government in a grant to double track, which will increase the amount of time that trains will be able to come at 15 and 30-minute intervals as opposed to 30-minute and 1 hour. Would that change the way that you commute down to Provo, being able to ride your bike to FrontRunner and then hop on the train?
Absolutely. Hopefully, what it means is that there will be more frequent service and less service interruptions. UTA is a phenomenal public transit agency. Obviously, we have goals for them. We would love to see them go further and expand. But double tracking FrontRunner is really an essential component of that, especially as we look forward to the Olympics. And other large scale events that we could potentially host with a new hockey team, with the Utah Jazz, with a potential MLB team coming. We're going to be at the crossroads of a lot of major national and international events, and having a double tracked FrontRunner system that allows for 15-minute service or 30-minute service is huge. The other thing that double tracking will potentially do, it will not be in the short term, but unlocks the potential for electrification. If you've got, one track system that's sharing tracks with traditional freight, electrifying freight rail is going to be a very expensive and long-term initiative. Electrifying commuter rail is a different question, but you've got to have separate tracks and able to do that. Again, this is a long-term thing, but double tracking is a first step in the long-term goal of electrifying FrontRunner, which has environmental benefits, but then also has service benefits like making it more reliable, being able to use smaller trains, being able to use longer trains. All of that is dependent on future electrification of FrontRunner.
Can we go back in time just a little bit, and can you explain to us what the difference is between a commuter train and a freight train and why that matters for the Trax line?
Yes, at risk of talking about things that I don't know about, the oversimplified answer is a commuter train moves people and very rarely has heavy loads. The heaviest load that it will carry is a very full train full of people, and maybe longer, a higher number of rail cars and a longer train. A freight train, as you know, can carry much, much heavier objects. It can carry everything from vehicles to grain, to oil, to milk, and everything in between. And so when they're planning freight, they're planning for much heavier, and in some cases, more dangerous loads that have to be moved through our community. Everything from low-grade nuclear waste to milk moves in rail trains. And so when they're planning for rail, they have to plan for much heavier loads. You can see these as they go through our city, where oftentimes you have engines at the beginning of the train, in the middle of the train, and at the end of the train, because they are so heavy. And then they have different safety requirements. And so you can imagine that a FrontRunner train, I don't know how heavy a FrontRunner train is off the top of my head, but it's going to be significantly lighter than a freight train. And so when you're talking about electrification, we're able to electrify a commuter train much easier than we're able to electrify freight right now. That is not to say that we cannot do it. but that it is a much more costly and much more expansive process. The other thing about a commuter train that's different than a freight train is it has a beginning and an end destination that is much shorter than freight. So when freight is moving, it's often moving in between states. It's moving from, Cedar City to Provo, or to Salt Lake City, or to Tooele. And so it's just a much longer commute than there would be for FrontRunner. FrontRunner ends in North Ogden or Pleasant View. It's not, that station is not currently open, but it's the furthest north that FrontRunner goes, and then down to Provo. And so you've got a limited amount of track that you actually have to electrify, which makes it easier to electrify than, say, a freight train that's going from California to Cedar City. It's just much more expansive, much longer, and much more expensive to electrify those rails.
That's interesting. So going back to what we were talking about before I took us off on this train tangent, warning to listeners, I'm a big fan of trains, and so we may be circling back to more of them as we go along. But I am curious why you decided to get involved in the three particular boards: the Transportation Advisory, the Housing Authority, and the Civilian Review Board. Like, those seem somewhat connected, but also somewhat disparate. And I'm curious why, what attracted you to each of them?
Yeah, so I'll start with the Civilian Review Board because I joined it first. I was appointed in February of 2019 by Mayor Biskupski. And I come from a family with law enforcement. So my younger brother is actually a Salt Lake City police officer. He was not at the time that I joined the Civilian Review Board. And obviously, if there were ever a case that he were involved in, I would disclose that, and I would not be involved in reviewing that case. Just want to flag that for listeners. But my dad is actually looking at retiring in October after 30. Let's see, I'll be 36 this year. So my dad's been in law enforcement for around 38 years.
Wow.
And worked his entire career there. And he originally started in Weber County at Weber County Sheriff's Office, and then now is a lieutenant at Utah Transit Authority. But my experience with law enforcement, I grew up around law enforcement, and so I have a deep and abiding respect for how difficult law enforcement is, and the toll that it takes on our law enforcement officers. But because I grew up around law enforcement, I also have high expectations for the behavior that they should have and the way that they should interact with the public. I originally decided to get involved when I moved to Salt Lake City, because I believe that civilian oversight is so important for reinforcing trust in law enforcement. I want, I'll reveal my cards. I want people to trust law enforcement and to respect the difficult job that our law enforcement officers have. But I believe that respect has to be earned. And it is earned by having good policy, good training, and good disciplinary action when those things don't work out. And so that was my motivation for joining. I have a deep belief in the work that law enforcement does, and believe that the community at the end of the day is who should have oversight of law enforcement. Throughout our history as a country and as a city, our expectation of law enforcement has changed. You saw this most recently during the protests in 2020, expectations around the ways that force is used, the elimination of chokeholds and things like that. But then you also have a public, and that pendulum swings oftentimes. We've seen different periods in our city where crime has risen, and there's an expectation. I would point to the Ballpark neighborhood as an example. The Ballpark neighborhood, as it's transformed and as its community has changed, the expectations that they've had, the need for law enforcement to be involved in their communities, to make folks feel safe, to have public spaces be truly public and not taken over by activities that I don't think any of us want in parks, drug use, those kinds of things. We also require active law enforcement. And so for me, it's about threading that needle and making sure that we have both the community's voice represented in what they expect from law enforcement, but then also respecting that law enforcement's a tough job. They have to make split second decisions. They have to be responsive to both the community's needs and to the threats that they face as law enforcement officers. And there's a reason that we have law enforcement as one of the core functions of our local governments. And that's because they're on the front line of dealing with things that, quite frankly, as a civilian, I don't want to deal with. I don't want to go into a dark building at 2 o'clock in the morning to find someone who is accused of shooting someone or to find someone who's accused of robbing a store at gunpoint. Those are not situations I want to be in. And yet we expect our officers to go into those situations every single day. How they interact with the public is essential. I could go on, but essentially that's at the end of me. Or my desire to get involved is threading that needle between public's expectations and the difficult job that law enforcement have. I joined the Transportation Advisory Board because I view the city as at a crossroads. With the Olympics coming, I mentioned the sports teams and different things. We've got our new arts, culture, and entertainment district coming downtown. We're debating the future of Main Street, whether it's going to be a pedestrian thoroughfare or whether it's going to stay kind of a mix of uses with public transportation and cars and walkability. And I view the city as at a crossroads. We have some very, very important decisions to make in the coming years about the future of our city and where we're headed as a city. And I think one of the important decisions we have to make as a city is, who are our streets for? Are they for cars or are they for everyone? And that includes cars, but it also includes people on wheelchairs, people who walk, people who drive, young kids, older adults. I think we need to make a decision in the coming years that we want our city streets to be for everyone. And that takes a strategic approach that says, what is parking? What are our streets? And how do we get to a place where everyone, regardless of their age or ability, feels safe to use our city streets on whatever mode that they use, whether they're walking, whether they're on a bus, or whether they're on a bike, or they're using their feet to get around the city. And so I'm motivated by those kinds of things and think we have to make a strategic shift in that direction. I think oftentimes, and you've seen this recently, where the state has gotten more and more involved in our local streets. To my chagrin and to the chagrin of a lot of my colleagues, that heavy-handed approach often means that cars are put at the center of the use of our city streets. And yet, when you talk with neighbors, when you talk with folks who are taking their kids to school, or the kids themselves that now all have public transit passes and are using our city streets and buses for their own needs, when you talk with the community, there's often a disconnect between the way that streets are designed and the desire that folks have for our city streets. And so I joined the board. I represent Walk on the board. I was appointed as a representative of Walk. And so I try to bring that perspective to every meeting. What is the point of our streets? Who are we designing our streets for? And how do we create a future where everyone is safe and, quite frankly, enjoys the experience that we have on our city streets? I want to point to what I view are some big successes that our city has done and is continuing to do. The 9-line trail and 9th South redesign, I would point to this as a huge success for our city. And you see this in terms of ridership and usage of the 9-line trail.
Mm-hmm.
You have more families and more people on bikes using the 9-line than were using 900 South before. And that, to me, is an example. We still have vehicle traffic. We still have on-street parking. And yet we've created this whole alternative for folks that want to go east and west, whether on their feet or on their bike, across the city. And they're not they're not in a bike lane. They're on a multi-use path that goes east to west and really tied our city together. 300 North is another example. We've now got a bridge that crosses the railroad tracks. You've got dedicated bike lanes. The future of 300 North looks a lot like 900 South, where you've got basically a commuter thoroughfare that can get people from east to west. And both of these resources will eventually connect fully to the Jordan River Trail, which is the last success that I would point out. I think the city is doing a remarkable job of planning for the Jordan River Trail to be basically a connector north and south of the west side, and then eventually east and west as it connects to things like the Folsom Trail, 300 North, and the 9-line trail. So those are examples of things that motivate me. the Housing Authority Board, I was recently invited to join the board and was very excited to join. I think, and I said this in my confirmation hearing with the city council, I think one of the cruelest things about our society, and this is true in Salt Lake City and nationwide, it's not unique to Salt Lake City, but that you can spend your entire life contributing to our city. And as you age out, or if you have a dramatic change in income, you can be priced out of our city and no longer have a place to live in our city.
Or you have
And
kids.
or you have kids, or your kids grow up, or you have an adult with a disability,
Mm-hmm.
or you have, you are injured yourself and experience a dramatic change in your life. All of these big life changes can have the end result of you being priced out or pushed out of our city, unless there's organizations on the front line, and the housing authority, public housing developers like the housing authority are on the front line of making sure that those situations are a thing of the past. I neglected to also mention that there are federal requirements to house folks with AIDS, people living with AIDS. And so the housing authority is also essential in making sure that folks with AIDS are also provided opportunities to live in the city that they love. And that's, looking at the housing authority and public developers like it, they provide an essential role in making sure that whether it's income, age, disability, children, chronic illnesses, that there is housing for everyone and that housing is affordable and publicly provided in our community.
That's really interesting. I guess you said you've recently joined the Housing Authority, because I know that before you were the Wasatch Advocates for Livable Communities, WALK, your organization was known as Neighbors for More Neighbors. And I'm curious what made you decide to rebrand and maybe even do a pivot from for More Neighbors to WALK.
Yes, to be transparent, we miss our old name. I loved the Neighbors for More Neighbors brand, and at the end of the day, that is what motivates WALK. Is this idea that every community should be welcoming, that they should be income and ethnically diverse, that we should undo the racist legacy of redlining and other exclusionary policies like exclusionary zoning. But at the end of the day, as we were looking at the issues that we were working on as a citywide organization, when we had the opportunity and the desire to expand to be a regional organization, our board and myself both felt that strategically and also from a vision standpoint, that livability, if we're just looking at housing in a vacuum, we're missing a huge opportunity to talk about what actually makes life expensive and difficult for folks in our communities. And that is a mix of housing. Housing will always be at the center of what WALK is working on. But if we're just talking about housing in a vacuum, we're also missing the fact that in our commuter shed, the 6 counties that we work in, and that's, to illustrate for listeners, that's Park City to Provo, Provo to Ogden, Salt Lake City to Summit County, and everywhere in between. But on any given day in that commuter shed, 20% of the population of almost every county in this region is commuting to another county within this region, or
20%?
20%.
So 1 out of every 5 commuters is going to a different county.
Or a different city.
Wow.
And so you can imagine that people in Ogden might be commuting to Salt Lake City for work. People who live in Salt Lake City may be, this is true of me, driving to Ogden to visit family or my parents who are still up in Ogden.
Mm-hmm.
Folks who live in Salt Lake City may be driving to Park City to work, or folks who live in Wasatch County are driving into Park City to work at a ski resort because they can't afford to live in Park City. But that commuter shed, the amount of movement that's happening within our region, we have to be talking about that as well, because it's easy to build more affordable homes farther and further away from opportunity. And I don't mean to pick on any specific community, but looking at an Eagle Mountain as an example, Eagle Mountain is historically farmland and has been redeveloped into family-friendly, more affordable housing than you would get in, say, a Provo. But there's a cost that comes with that. There's only one entrance, one street that goes into Eagle Mountain, and there is no public transit that currently reaches Eagle Mountain. And so if you're a commuter You may be able to buy a more affordable home in a place that's further away, but the cost of commuting is something that we also have to factor into your livability. Do we want to spend an hour in a car either way every morning and every night just to get to a job? And so those are things that, as we started thinking about what is the goal of this organization if we expand regionally, we have to look at livability. And that was what we ultimately decided, was that this bigger emphasis on livability was a priority for us. And while the Neighbors for More Neighbors ethos is always going to be part of us, we're always motivated by those things that I mentioned, undoing the racist legacy of redlining, and trying to create new opportunity for folks to live in our communities. We also have to be looking at this more expansively and connecting transportation and economic development with housing and housing with those things.
So, what were some of the accomplishments at Neighbors for More Neighbors, like your keystone accomplishments?
Well, early on, we decided to focus on a couple of priorities. So one of the first priorities was the affordable housing incentives. Another priority was accessory dwelling units. And then the last one was missing middle zoning, RMF 30, which stands for residential multifamily, and then 30 feet tall, essentially.
Oh, you
Townhome.
knew I was going to ask. Thank you so much.
Yep, it always comes up. But before I kind of talk about those accomplishments, what I want to talk about is our organizing model and our theory of change. So one of the difficult things for policymakers and planners is that our public decision-making bodies, and that would be our planning commission and our city council, are inherently biased toward folks who are oppositional to what's happening or what's on the agenda. As you can imagine, if there's a rezone in your neighborhood, generally the folks that are going to show up for the public hearing are the folks who are the angriest about that rezone in that neighborhood. And so what we tend to see in these public bodies is they end up being negatively biased because, say you are a mom trying to get your kid to soccer practice after getting off of work at 5:30 on a Tuesday, you're not going to go to the city council at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday and wait for potentially 3 hours to make your 2-minute public comment and say, well, my family could benefit from this condo or this townhome that's being proposed in this neighborhood. It's just not reality. You're not going to show up. And so what you end up having happen is folks who are oppositional to these things end up dominating and overwhelming in these meetings. And so our theory of the case and theory of change has been, if we can change who is showing up and who is contacting their elected officials, and more importantly, the story that we're telling about these decisions. When a city council member or a planning commissioner is voting on, and this is happening in my neighborhood right now in Glendale, which we can talk about, but there is a proposal to build family-sized, affordable townhomes in my neighborhood. And there is a group of people who have put up signs all throughout the neighborhood saying single-family homes only. I can't really abide by that because essentially what they're doing is it doesn't say this on the sign, but the message is that there is no opportunity for folks to own in our neighborhood. All we want is people who could buy $600,000 to $700,000 new build homes in our neighborhood. And what that has the effect of doing is making neighborhoods that are richer and wider and less inclusive of the folks that are looking to get their start in our city right now. And so our theory has always been that if we make a better argument and we show up and we make a case for this housing, that it will help benefit not only the planners, but the public decision makers like our city council and planning commissioners that are looking to the public for feedback. So
can I just ask you to publicly on this podcast come and figure out what to do with the Sizzler parcel on the Sugar House Park? Like, we need a solution for that, and we just keep getting told no, no, no at city council. And like, I don't want a blighted parking lot there. There's so many things that we could do there. So, public plea, please.
yeah, I this is interesting because getting down to like the individual parcel level is where you tend to see the most opposition.
Yep.
Folks are very hesitant to see their neighborhood change. And I think it was unfortunate that the hotel was voted down. It's not that I'm like a big fan of hotels, but at the end of the day, it was a vision that would have activated that parcel in an area that, quite frankly, is going to be very, very hard to activate. It is not a walkable space. It's not easy to access, but it's right off of a freeway. It's in a highly developing area, highly desirable area. Um, so, I wish I had a magic wand and could help solve that problem. Maybe the answer is to bring Sizzler back or get Chili's to move from 400 South over and open Chili's
Ooh.
there.
The Chipotle down the way on 21st looks like it's having some issues. So maybe just whip in a Chipotle
Yeah,
there or something.
maybe it should move over there. But I kind of going back to your original question on the three early successes, and I want to clarify that we we did not make any of these happen. I would never say that walk or at the time Neighbors for More Neighbors was a deciding factor in any of these campaigns. The city council, to its credit, I want to call out specifically former council member Darren Mano, who really led the fight on housing on the city council, but also Alejandro Puy and Dan Dugan and Sarah Young. All of the folks on the council right now have been very thoughtful and very intentional about the way that they approach policy related to housing. And so we showed up, we mobilized, and we tried to support the council and advocate for things that we think are the right thing to do. On accessory dwelling units, a couple of things that we really
Hang on.
advocated. Oh, yeah.
Really quick, I do have a question for you about affordable housing incentives ordinance. There was a recent report in the Salt Lake Trib, and it said, quote, Salt Lake City's major affordable housing incentives have landed 2 completed projects. So I'm curious, what do you think are some of the causes that are preventing this overhaul from effectuating new housing?
I think one is that these incentives were created at a time of big market uncertainty. Interest rates are at an all-time high. We've seen a huge slowdown. This has been reported both in the Trib and in Building Salt Lake, that our larger multifamily developments have slowed down in Salt Lake City. And this is due to a confluence of things, everything from tariffs to a labor market shortage, to inflation and interest rates, and a whole host of other things. So I think that's one explanation, is that you see some broader market trends that kind of run against incentives working in the current market. I think the second thing about the affordable housing incentives is that they are incentives. At the end of the day, the state legislature has banned inclusionary zoning. And what that means is essentially the city, unless the city is a partner in the development and putting resources in, they cannot require, say, 10% of units to be affordable. They are prohibited from doing that by state law. Caveat that inclusionary zoning really only works if it's funded. We see the difference between California and Oregon. Oregon's inclusionary zoning law is fully funded. California's is not. And so you see a difference in the number of affordable units created between those two jurisdictions. But the last thing that I'll say about the affordable housing incentives is we have to be able to use them in every residential neighborhood as they were designed to. But at the end of the day, there is huge opposition to using density bonuses in most of our established single family neighborhoods. And a case study 101 is the Van Buren rezone that I mentioned in my neighborhood. Right now, you have neighbors up in arms about what would have been more affordable housing and would have included affordable units. And instead, the neighborhood is pushing for single family homes, which quite frankly is garbage. Like, it runs counter to the argument that is being made that we need more housing affordability. And yet the advocacy that's being directed against the project is damaging to affordability goals. At the end of the day, it's going to have the result of resulting in $600,000 new construction and not more affordable townhomes. So I think there's a confluence of things. The last thing that I'll say,
really quick.
Yeah.
Sorry. You're
No,
so,
you're good.
I love it. You have so much to say. It's fantastic. So, if I understand correctly, a density bonus in this instance that you're talking about here is that the developer is receiving tax benefits or credits in exchange for creating housing that has a higher number of families that live on a parcel. Is that a good way to think about that?
Yes. And so to illustrate the affordable housing incentives, and this is back of the napkin math, this is not
Gotcha.
builder math, but let's say that you are a builder and you're building a 100 unit apartment complex. If you agree under the incentives to deed restrict, which means to legally restrict 10% of those units as affordable, and affordable meaning measured against the area median income. Usually that's 80% area median income or below. So say you make 10% of those units deed restricted affordable, then you would get a density bonus that say would allow you to build an additional floor. So instead of being able to build 100
Mm.
units, you would be able to build 120 units if you agree to build and deed restrict a certain number of those units.
And this
The
is helpful for
okay.
a developer because that means that they're then able to add more like people paying into their pot, which then makes it more affordable for them to like pay out their, development in 20 years, pay off their
Yes.
mortgage essentially. Okay.
Yep. And it's beneficial for our community because it spreads out affordable units throughout the city. And
And it
it
also
allows,
builds what you were talking about earlier about a mixed complexity, a mixed, componentry of who is living where and in what, mix.
yes. And we would never say that affordable homes make a neighborhood weaker or that they damage homes.
Hmm.
But what we would say is that concentrating all low income homes in one area is not beneficial for the folks that live in that community or that
Hmm.
even low income folks that are able to find affordable homes. What we want is a mix of incomes because it creates opportunity for everyone there. You can
Hmm.
imagine that if you build affordable homes near the University of Utah, that means that working people, maybe who are CNAs that are working at the hospital, have the opportunity to live near the hospital and walk to the hospital or ride their bike to the hospital. They're not driving in from Harriman. They're not driving in from Tooele. They're able to live near their job, which saves them commute time. It saves them money, saves them energy, and it gives them the opportunity, if they're not commuting 2 hours every day, to study for that nurse's test, to study for whatever the next step in their career is, that they then, as they rise in income, can then buy a home in their neighborhood, can then rent a market rate unit in their neighborhood. And it
Yeah.
creates that kind of opportunity that cities have always promised to their residents, and why we see urbanization as such an important core goal for our state as it grows. We want to see the state build in and not build out. Sprawl doesn't always benefit us in the ways that building homes near jobs can.
Interesting. So, really quickly, talk to me about how an ADU fits into some of this.
Yeah. So an ADU fits in because what we see with ADUs is they are typically built to solve what we would call a social or a family problem. Most people, so a couple of important things to know about ADUs. Banks do not finance ADUs. You cannot use the revenue that you expect to charge for an ADU against as collateral against the loan to build an ADU. There are some exceptions to this, but writ large, that is true. And the reason being is that an ADU is basically viewed as an extension of the home that it is built on the property of. So if I built an ADU in my backyard, the ADU is basically viewed as a part of that single family home. It can't currently be sold separately, although that's a goal of WALK in the long term, to make ADUs be able to be sold separately using a tenancy in common practice, basically like an HOA model, but at a small scale. So financing is a huge barrier to ADUs. And because of that, the people that build ADUs are individual homeowners. Because of that, typically what happens is a homeowner has to be sitting on a large amount of equity or a good amount of cash that they can then put toward building an ADU. And for listeners' information, the cost of building an ADU in Salt Lake City ranges between $200,000 and $350,000, depending on the quality, whether it's a conversion, whether it's
Wow.
a new build, the size, a variety of things go into that. But typically, what we see is the folks that build an ADU have an aging parent that they want to house. And a lot of times, the person that's building an ADU is actually the senior that owns a large single family home. And they're saying, I want to downsize. I don't want to clean 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms anymore. But if I sold my house, where would I go? They can't buy anything new. We have a lack of starter homes and smaller patio homes for seniors in our city, something we're working on and we can come back to. But typically, the genesis of an ADU is to solve a problem like that. It's, I want to downsize. I want my mom and dad to live in my backyard. I've got a college student that I need to house, or I've got an adult with disabilities in my life that can live independently, but not so independently that there's not someone checking in on them.
Well, and don't you think that an accessory dwelling unit, an ADU, is actually at the core ethos of who Salt Lake is? I think in a lot of ways, like I think about my family, like my mom lives directly next door, and we decided to do that because our parcel wasn't big enough to build an ADU on, so she just bought the house next to us. But, our fence opens up and the 2 yards are connected. That's fantastic. I've got a grandma down at one of the local nursing homes, and I wish that we had an ADU that I could put her in because it's really hard to get down there. And like, I know she needs daily care. And so I just think that heart of neighborliness, that heart of being together, of big sprawling families that all have unique and different needs, like that's what an ADU creates, that opportunity to be closer to your family and your friends and your loved ones.
Yes, and it aligns with the cultural diversity of Salt
Yeah.
Lake City as well. Looking at my neighborhood, we have so many multi-generational families that all
Hmm.
live together.
Oh, yeah.
And the idea of being able to provide a safe space tied to the family home, but a separate space, right? Like
Yeah.
we don't all want to live on top of one another necessarily,
A
but the
hundred
idea,
percent
yep,
correct.
but the idea of you being able to walk next door and check on your grandma or check on your
Hmm.
mom is huge. And it's who
Yeah.
we are as people. And then let's say, you built your ADU, you housed your grandma, and then eventually she passes away. Who is the next family member that you can use that for? Maybe you've got a brother or a sister who's going through a hard time. Maybe you've got an aunt or an uncle that needs a place to be. Maybe you've got a college student, or you've got your own children who are growing up trying to go to school, but that want to leave the nest, so to speak, but they don't want to move to Tooele, or they don't want to move out of the city and they
Yeah.
can't find an apartment here. I agree with you. I think ADUs are really at the center of our values, and so are the other forms of missing middle housing that we advocate for and that the city is working toward.
But I think this is a really interesting reframing of the issue. A lot of times when people hear about an ADU or an accessory dwelling unit, I think they get afraid that it's going to, quote, change the character of the neighborhood. And in a lot of ways, my pushback is no, actually, I think that it's going to deepen the character of the neighborhood
Yes.
because it's instead of pushing people out who need to leave or, for whatever reasons they end up leaving their house, instead they stay there and their families stay there and you continue to create these like really deep community like hubs. And I think that's really important. Can you talk to us a little bit why this is equally important for the missing middle zoning reform? And can you explain to us what missing middle is? Because I'm not sure everyone understands that.
Yeah. So missing middle, the best way to illustrate it is that let's say that you are out looking for a home. In our current market, what you see a lot of are single family homes, which tend to be the most expensive form of housing that we provide to people. And that's because most single family homes are a for sale product, which is great. I think ownership is a powerful and important component of our housing market, but they become extremely expensive very, very quickly. The other end of that spectrum that we see quite a lot of are the larger apartment complexes that you see popping up throughout our communities. And these are everything from what you see on North Temple to Fourth South down into the ballpark neighborhood. They're large, they're boxy, they house a lot of people, they provide amenities. They're a perfectly great form of housing. But for a lot of people, when they're looking at our housing market, a lot of people are saying, I can't afford a single family home, and I don't necessarily want to live in an apartment complex. What other options are available to me? And the answer is not a lot. We, in the 90s, in Salt Lake City specifically, we were in a period of population decline in Salt Lake City. And so the city council at the time downzoned the entire city. And what that means in practical terms is they eliminated the duplexes, the fourplexes, the townhomes, the row houses, the cottage courts, the little homes that all have a shared green space, and then they're all kind of built, usually in groups of 6 or 8. They eliminated those as options in our community. And now in 2026, as folks are looking for new options in our communities, they're not seeing those options. And yet, if we went back to the future in a weird way, these fourplexes and duplexes in places like the Avenues, Sugar House, East Central, Ballpark, Glendale, they're everywhere in our city. We actually have a list. We're going to be doing some Back to the Future tours in the fall, where we're going to do bike rides and go around and look at these housing options that used
Sign
to
me up.
exist.
I'm ready. Put me on the
We'll get you.
list.
We'll get you. But what we're trying to do, the missing middle is everything in between those large apartment complexes and single family homes. So that is starter homes that are built in backyards. That is ADUs that are constructed. That is duplexes and quadplexes. It's townhomes. It's all of those different options that really are at the heart of affordability. And when you look around the country at the cities that are really bending their cost curve and making their cities more affordable and inclusive and welcoming of people, it's the cities that have embraced missing middle homes, everything from duplexes to quadplexes to townhomes. That is the key to both affordability and ownership for the next generation. Making sure that we have a for sale inventory in our city is a priority of the city council. It's a priority of the planning commission. I would say it's a priority of the public, but we cannot do that through the traditional single family route because our city is largely built out. And so we need these missing middle options to both promote affordability and to promote ownership in the long term.
That's really interesting. So, based on everything you've said today, what are the top 2 initiatives Walk is fighting for right now?
So right now, I would say the single most important thing that we are working on in Salt Lake City is called expanding housing options. And it is what I just talked about. It is, honestly, it's a BFD for lack of a better word. Basically, what it would do is it would take us back to the future. It would re-legalize up to fourplexes in all of our neighborhoods. And this would mean that those cute little brick fourplexes that you see throughout our city, I'm going to point at the Avenues because I just think the Avenues is absolutely adorable. But those duplexes and fourplexes that you see throughout the Avenues would be legalized throughout the city. And what we've seen in places like Durham, North Carolina, in places like Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Nashville, Houston, it's happening all around the country. The cities that have done this kind of what we're calling a residential infill program are the ones that are seeing new homeownership opportunities pop up, new affordable options pop up, and most importantly, they're creating opportunities for families to come back to their cities, to their downtown, which is something that we view as particularly concerning about Salt Lake City is the evaporation of family style and family friendly housing. Large apartment complexes, one of the reasons that you don't see families sized housing being built is it's extremely expensive to do in a large apartment complex. Part of that is tied to our building codes, which I won't get into. Folks can follow Walk if they're interested in that work. I won't take us down the building codes route, but
We thank you for that.
yes, it's very wonky and will make everyone's eyes glaze over.
You and I can have a conversation about it offline because it is very interesting to me. But my business partner always tells me I have to bring my wonk down some. So
Yep.
Send me your white papers.
Yep. Come to one of our webinars and we can talk about the wonky things. But basically, expanding housing options is a generational change in the way that we create housing. It would create family sized neighborhood scale housing in all of our neighborhoods. And that is truly, there is no silver bullet to solve the housing affordability crisis, but there are some tried and true evidence-based policies, and this is one of those. And I want to, there's one important thing that has to be talked about this. The opposition to this is talking about neighborhood character. I am one of those people that does not believe that buildings provide neighborhood character. I love a beautiful home
Is
and
that a
beautiful.
bold statement? Like, am I going to get people coming at me for that?
No, they're going to come at me. But they should, because I don't believe that local historic districts and historic architecture is what makes a neighborhood, gives a neighborhood its character. I
So what
believe that
does?
the people who live in it, the fact that one of the, like, look at the avenues. I love the avenues, so I'm constantly talking about it. If you look at the avenues, yes, there are beautiful homes there. There are historic homes there. But it's the interesting and weird characters that bought those homes, that maintain those homes, that keep those homes up, that make the avenues what it is. It's the fact that you have people that have built native plant gardens and dedicated their yards to preserving bees and bringing hummingbirds. It's the fact that you have a mix of college students and seniors, people who've retired, people who are working, people who started their families, people who live in duplexes, people who live in condos. You have a whole range of people who call the avenues homes, or call the avenues home. And then you get things like the Avenues Street Fair. You get all of the small businesses and art galleries and businesses like coffee shops and Java Joe's and Jack Mormon Coffee. That comes from the people who call our city home. It doesn't come from the buildings. None of this is to say that we should not do historic preservation. We absolutely should, because it's part of our cultural legacy. But if we're not allowing our neighborhoods to grow, if we're not continuing to welcome people, then what we end up with is monolithic communities where only rich people can live. And when only rich people can call a neighborhood home, you don't end up with a lot of character in that neighborhood, because you lose your artists, you lose your entrepreneurs, you lose your college students and your nurses and your doctors. You lose the people that make a neighborhood what it is and that really create the culture of a neighborhood. You know, I look at places in Sugar House like Tea's Ante. How lucky are we that there are entrepreneurs who are willing to fight road construction, to keep a small business alive, and to dedicate it to the community in a way that it's a community space that the community loves and the community sustains. If you are concerned, like I am, about our communities becoming strip malls and big box stores, then incremental growth and incremental development is for you. It's how we make strong cities, strong towns, and how we build neighborhoods and a culture that is strong. The opposition often uses neighborhood character as a cudgel to fight housing. And we did a poll earlier this year asking Salt Lake City residents about this false binary. Would you choose neighborhood character, or would you choose more affordable housing options? 62% of Salt Lake City residents told the pollster the city should prioritize creating more housing options rather than preserving neighborhood character. Only 26% said that we should preserve neighborhood character at the expense of housing affordability. So the public is with us. At the end of the day, we know that that is a fake choice. You don't have to choose between neighborhood character and housing. New housing options just adds to the character of the neighborhood. And if you don't believe me, go walk through the neighborhoods at in the lower avenues and tell me that those are not beautiful, character rich, and people rich neighborhoods.
Okay, great. I love that. Our comments are open. Come talk to us. Let us know how you think Turner's wrong or possibly right. I think that you've got a really interesting and compelling argument there. With the Winter Olympics officially returning to Utah in 2034, billions of dollars in public transit, infrastructure, and urban planning funds are likely to come to the region. And I'm going to put my cards fully on the table here. I am a train girl. Like, my motto is trains for everyone, everywhere, all the time. I dream of a train up to Park City from Salt Lake City in like the middle of the freeway. I want to exchange the gondola for a train that's connected to the train system that runs from Tooele to the canyons to Provo up to Ogden. Like, I just don't see why we can't be We can't take the infrastructure that already exists and expand it outwards to solve the issues that we are facing. And I'm asking you, is my dream possible, Turner? Can we have trains?
Your dream is possible. And I would say there's one other wish list item that I would add to that. And what we need is a Grand Central Station for a coordinated rail network.
Oh, are
And
we lobbying for the Rio Grande plan?
I am lobbying for the Rio Grande.
Oh,
And if Ben McAdams is listening to me and the Democrats retake control of Congress in November and he's sitting in Congress in November, I hope that he will be putting pen to paper on an earmark to make it possible, because it's going to require federal investment to make the Rio Grande plan happen. One of the biggest issues that we see in transportation is a funding issue. The Rio Grande plan is great in concept. I think all 7 of our city council members and mayor have signed on. State leaders will tell you how much they love it. But at the end of the day, the funding is the biggest issue with making it happen. There's not a lack of vision. There's not a lack of enthusiasm and support for it. There's simply a lack of funding. And so whoever's out there with some deep pockets that's listening, if we can find the money, we can make the Rio Grande plan the center of a regional rail network. I love the idea of getting on a train and going to Park City. I also want to be able to hop on a train and go to Boise or to go to Denver or to go to Moab or St. George eventually. And all of these require a coordinated rail system. Looking at the Olympics, the last time that the Olympics were here, we had huge amounts of infrastructure dollars come in. Some of that was, in my mind, wasted and spent on freeway expansion. And I would love to see a day where those dollars come in and are spent on transformational projects like a rail line to Park City or expanding FrontRunner, electrifying FrontRunner. There's a variety of different projects that could be financed leveraging those infrastructure dollars. Listeners just need to continue to put pressure on state lawmakers, local lawmakers, to make sure that those ideas are translated into policy and that they then are aligned with funding that can make them happen.
that's really interesting. So, how can ordinary residents tap into this Olympic momentum to push for projects in their very own backyards?
Continue to push your local elected officials and then engage with state elected officials. I think a lot of times we think we can only reach out to our elected official because they represent us, but reach out to members of the transportation committee, reach out to the governor's office, reach out to your congressperson, reach out to folks that don't represent you and tell them how a regionally connected network would benefit everyone and why using Salt Lake City as the transportation hub that it is for the entire state and region, why it makes sense to connect the city to the rest of our communities, why it makes sense for FrontRunner to go out to Tooele. We want folks in Tooele to be able to commute into the city. I would love to have better transportation access to Tooele. It would mean more people would go more places and tie our commuter shed together in a way that's coherent and efficient.
Yeah. So, if someone listening to this podcast wants to start making a difference in housing, zoning, or transportation today, what is the most effective thing that they can do this week?
Sign our petition and take action in support of expanding housing options. If you're a Salt Lake City resident, go to wasatchalc.org/EHO, as in expanding housing options. It's embedded there on that page. You can also get all the information you need about the residential infill project, Walk's work on it. And then the other thing I would say, we are working on state level legislation, which we didn't have a chance to get to today, but maybe we'll come back when we get closer to the state legislature and talk about the variety of bills that we're working on at the state
Oh my gosh.
legislature.
You're making my dreams come true. Yes. Sold. See you in December.
Okay. We need to have a conversation about it, but we're working on everything from yes, in God's backyard, allowing affordable homes to be built on unused church parking lots and property, a variety of different things that all gets to the heart of what folks want to see in their communities.
That's awesome. And how can people get connected further? I mean, you mentioned your website for the petition. Is there any other way that folks can connect with you and walk?
Yep, at Wasatch ALC on all social media channels, wasatchalc.org. And then you can find me. There's not a lot of Turner Bittons out there in the world.
Just one, and he's right here today, folks. Okay, thank you so much. Our final question that we always like to ask everyone is, how are you finding joy in your life right now, Turner?
Oh, I pickleball is a big source of joy for me. The other thing, I just think that living in Salt Lake City provides so many opportunities. I get to go to a different cultural festival, fair, party, concert all the time. And I am just so grateful that we have so many cultural communities within Salt Lake City that share their culture with the community writ large, whether it's the Utah Arts Festival, Living Traditions. All of those things are a great source of joy for me. And then I also have two stupid dogs at home that just I love to death and could not go without mentioning Melon and Moose.
You know, one of my dogs has 2 brain cells and the other has 10, and it makes for a very interesting life.
That the 12 brain cells are way more than my dogs have. I think they each have one.
We actually have a I will leave you with a song. We go bark 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 baby with both their brain cells. All right, thank you so much, Turner Bitton, for joining me today.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for listening today. You can catch Around the Counter with Molly and Friends on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Substack. We are on Sugar House Community Radio, Sundays at 8 p.m. and Wednesdays at 7 a.m. See you next week.